You're living here for a measly sum. My husband's words made my mouth twitch in annoyance. That's right. You don't do any housework, sleep for 5 hours, and you're just squatting in Denise's house. You're like the black sheep of the family. Why don't you just leave? Black sheep, huh? Who's the real black sheep here? A subtle smile escaped my tightened lips at my mother-in-law's words. I just didn't care anymore. Is that so? Well, if you insist, I'll take my leave. That was the last time I saw my mother-in-law and husband. My name is Carlin Mavey. I'm 32 and work for a notable company in Boston. It's a pretty big firm. Work there earnestly for a decade, and you'll find yourself in a respectable position with a decent income. 2 years ago, I married Dennis, who works for a similar-sized company. We lived in a newly built house. To everyone around us, it must have seemed like smooth sailing. I met Dennis, who's a year older than me, through a friend's introduction. My first impression was that he seemed sincere. He often talked about his mother, and I liked that he valued family. We didn't have a fiery romantic start, but we kind of started dating and then kind of got married. Even after marriage, we had no children because we both needed to continue working. We lived in a house too big for just the two of us, enjoying a comfortable newlywed life. Because we were both working, we often missed each other, but we made sure to value the time we spent together, and we had no financial problems. I thought we were doing well, until now. Unlike me, who had lived alone since starting college, Dennis lived with his parents until just before our marriage. Born and raised in Boston, both his college and current workplace were not far from his family home. I only knew his late father through photos. Dennis was still in high school when his father passed away. He probably didn't want to leave his mother alone. I met my mother-in-law for the first time at a dinner arranged for both families to meet. Dennis had told me his mother was about the same age as my own, but she looked much younger, a truly beautiful woman. Nice to meet you, Carlin. My son speaks so highly of you. Please take good care of him. My mother-in-law smiled warmly as she spoke. I couldn't sense any of the hardships she must have endured after losing her husband. Nice to meet you too, mother-in-law. I'm looking forward to becoming family, I replied, feeling relieved. I thought that this person and I might actually build a good family relationship together. Our home seemed to promise a fulfilling future, always filled with laughter and warmth. Both my parents and my mother-in-law were fully supportive of our marriage, and the preparations moved along surprisingly smoothly. We set the date for the wedding, and our house under construction was nearly complete. Before embarking on our married life, we made some decisions. We agreed we'd both work for a while, so we needed to pre-plan chores, taking care of mother-in-law and financial matters. Firstly, chores would be handled by whoever was available at the time. Regarding my mother-in-law, she was still healthy and had my father-in-law's inheritance, so she wouldn't struggle financially. We decided it would be best if we lived separately. Up to this point, all was good. But then came the issue of money. I thought splitting all expenses, including the mortgage, would be fair. Dennis had different ideas. He proposed that I handle the mortgage payments while he took care of other living expenses. This gave me pause. I had heard of couples splitting everything or pooling resources, but Dennis's suggestion was unusual. The monthly mortgage alone was $2,700. I had thought from the beginning that this was too heavy a burden. The 3-story house was too big, even if we were to have children, and the large property, mostly chosen by Dennis, seemed daunting to manage. Looking back, I realized I had already made several wrong choices, but I wasn't thinking clearly at the time. I didn't want any financial disagreements before marriage, so I convinced myself to agree with Dennis's proposal. In addition to the mortgage, there were other costs like groceries, utility bills, and taxes. I had no idea how much I would regret that decision later on. Every month, we put all our payments into a joint account in Dennis's name. This included the mortgage, living expenses, travel costs, and future savings. The monthly withdrawals were hefty, but we were both high earners to begin with. Given our busy work schedules and limited time off, the joint account should have been continually growing. Why isn't there as much money as I expected? I stumbled upon it by chance. I casually opened our savings book to see how much we had saved up, wondering if we had some major expenses. I couldn't recall anything significant. That left the possibility that Dennis might have spent on something, but he didn't mention anything during our last family meeting. We both had busy work schedules. I left before Dennis woke up, and he came home after I'd gone to bed, so we often didn't get to talk much even though we lived together. To break through this disconnect, we started having regular family meetings. We discussed big financial decisions like how to spend our savings and future travel plans. We just had a family meeting a few days ago. Seeing our savings dwindle without hearing anything about it at the meeting was odd. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, I thought, scanning through the latest transactions. I realized Dennis hadn't transferred his share of the living expenses for this month. I glanced at the calendar. It had been 3 days since payday. We were supposed to contribute our share by then. Maybe he just forgot. Dennis was coming home late today, so I decided to ask him gently tomorrow and then forgot all about it. 3 months later, I remembered. Come to think of it, I never actually checked. Did he make the transfer like he was supposed to? With that thought, I opened the drawer in our living room TV stand and pulled out the bank book for our joint account, which was under Dennis's name. I flipped through the pages and my eyes widened. What's going on here? The balance had decreased even more since last time. A growing sense of distrust filled me. I could hear my own heartbeat ringing in my ears. A sinking feeling crossed my mind, and with trembling fingers, I flipped the pages back. My worst fears were confirmed. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered. Household expenses hadn't been transferred for 3 months. Dennis didn't come home until late that night, and we missed each other the next morning. I couldn't confront him due to our conflicting schedules and my growing unease. Finally, I caught him on the weekend and declared that we were having an emergency family meeting. Dennis reluctantly sat on a living room sofa and looked at me, his face serious as if he knew I had discovered the truth. You know what this is about, don't you? As much as I wanted to explode in anger, I started the conversation as calmly as possible. Dennis nodded quietly. Why haven't the household expenses been paid for the last 3 months? The truth is, what Dennis told me was beyond anything I could have imagined. To cut to the chase, Dennis had quit his job without telling me. This all started 4 months ago. My coworker got promoted before me. Can you believe it? A guy less competent than me. The boss is clueless. The company is a mess. What's the point of staying at a place that can't even evaluate people properly? I was stunned. I couldn't find the words to respond. Sure, it's frustrating to be surpassed by a coworker. I get that, but we have a family and we just built our house. Shouldn't you secure another job before quitting? Isn't that just common sense? I thought he was a man of integrity. That's why I married him. I didn't recognize this man who spoke so rashly. So what's the plan? You were going to find another job, right? Of course, I want to show them. I'm planning to get a job at an even bigger company, so cover our living expenses till then. Dennis replied, unfazed, as if he didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. He didn't even apologize. Not that I needed an apology, but the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Everyone has times when they're unhappy at work and want to quit. I don't love my job every single day either. What hurt most was that he didn't even consult me first. So I agreed to cover the expenses, but only for a short time. Dennis seemed to be actively job hunting while I was at work. Initially, I thought it would be fine. There were job magazines on our living room table, and I figured he'd find something soon. But months passed, and I began to realize I had been too optimistic. A year went by, and Dennis still hadn't found a job. You've been supporting me for a year now. Can't you just keep doing it? You're the one with the stable income anyway, he said. I was already struggling with the mortgage, and the cost of living was piling up, making me work harder than ever before. I willingly took on overtime and even worked weekends. I barely had time to breathe, let alone handle chores. I was sleep-deprived and disoriented. I almost fainted on the train to work today. Dennis's offhand comment didn't sound like a joke to me, and even if it were, I couldn't take it that way. What was the point of our marriage? Of me working so hard? I began to lose sight of everything. I'm going out, I mumbled, knowing Dennis probably wouldn't hear me, and headed for the door. Today was another work day. I had to make money no matter what. Dragging my feet to work, I survived the day on willpower alone. I finally headed home more exhausted than when the day started. It was already past 10 p.m. and dark outside. I'm home, I called out as I pushed the door open. I noticed something unfamiliar in the entranceway. A pile of cardboard boxes. What's this? I wondered. They were too old and sloppily packed to be delivery boxes. Just then, the living room door opened, and Dennis appeared, his face covered in stubble. Oh, they're for my mom. She was having a hard time living alone, so we decided she should move in with us. What? I didn't hear anything about this, I said, my anger surging. Living together? What on earth was he talking about? Ever since he quit his job without telling me, I had no idea what he was thinking. I used to worry about his mother living alone, and I'd even thought we could have a good family relationship. But I didn't know then that my seemingly cheerful and pleasant mother-in-law would turn out to be a real piece of work. The same could be said for my husband, too. What are you talking about? She's my mother. Helping her is a given. Are you stupid or something? Dennis's tone was dismissive. At this point, my opinion didn't matter anymore. I had enough of understanding this throughout my married life. A few days later, my mother-in-law showed up with a big grin. She hugged Dennis at the front door and gave me a sarcastic smile. "Oh, Carlin, you're here. I heard you're always busy with work, so I assumed you wouldn't be around," she said. Her words, "You probably don't do much housework, do you?" cracked my already fragile heart even more. My malevolent mother-in-law and my unemployed husband Dennis had finally pushed me to my breaking point. I couldn't see any hope for the future. Life with my mother-in-law was harder than I had ever imagined. When I'd get home late from work, she'd snark, "What are you doing not taking care of the house? You're failing as a wife." Dennis, far from defending me, would add insult to injury. "I'm letting you live in my house, so at least do the housework." How easy it would have been to say, "You're not working, so why don't you do it?" But no, that would only lead to more insults and emotional wounds. I didn't even have the energy to argue back anymore. My mother-in-law would just loaf around the house all day, never doing any housework, as if it were the norm. Dennis had become so entitled to being taken care of that the job listing magazines had disappeared from our living room. The only thing I could do while dealing with these two burdens was to work relentlessly. I needed money to live, but more than that, being engrossed in my job allowed me to forget the harsh reality. People around me probably found it strange to see me more focused on work than I was before getting married, despite not being married for very long. Occasionally, I felt concerned glances my way, but I was grateful they didn't say anything. If someone showed me kindness now, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to go on. Long days of working late, catching the last train home, squeezing in just 5 hours of sleep, and then heading back to the office as soon as dawn broke had become my routine. At this point, weekdays and weekends didn't even matter, but I did plan on taking a half day off sometime this weekend. The fact that I had to use that precious half day for a family meeting to tell those two that we couldn't continue living like this, especially when my savings kept dwindling, almost broke me. I knew my mother-in-law was constantly ordering food delivery, but recently even Dennis had been joining in. They'd been indulging in steak and caviar during the day. What's worse, they'd even been taking trips together. For now, they were just day trips, but it could escalate to international travel. I used to put extra money into our joint account, but after realizing how much they were spending, I now only transferred just enough to cover the monthly withdrawals. In other words, if they kept up the spending, payments would start falling behind, leading to a worst-case scenario. So here we are, the three of us gathered in the living room over the weekend. The two of them, now shadows of their former friendly and genuine selves, are glaring at the papers I've spread out on the coffee table. "What's the meaning of this, Carlin? What are you trying to say with all this paperwork?" My mother-in-law squints up at me. "It's a breakdown of our income and expenses. We can't continue living like this. I told you I'll pay it back when I get a job. Just hold on a bit. And the mortgage is just a measly $2,700. I'm letting you live in my house, so don't make a fuss over such a measly sum." "My house? You're letting me live here?" Measly sum, words I can't ignore make my lips twitch. "That's right, you're the black sheep here, sleeping 5 hours a day, not doing any housework, and living in Dennis's house. Why don't you just leave?" Black sheep? Who's the real black sheep here? A laugh escapes my tightened lips at my mother-in-law's words. Everything suddenly becomes inconsequential, or maybe, just maybe, I finally realized that there was never any need to try so hard. All right, no more bending over backward, not for these people. I felt like a weight had lifted from my body and soul. "Is that so? Well then, I'll take you up on that and leave." My voice echoed in the once quiet living room. I must be smiling more than I ever have before. "Ha! What?" Both of them looked stunned, their eyes glued to the coffee table. What I smoothly pulled off and placed on top of the papers was a bundle of divorce papers. Of course, they were already filled out and stamped by me. "Here, you sign it too. It'll make your mom feel more secure, won't it?" Mumbling, Dennis picked up the pen from the table. He hesitated for a moment but was encouraged by his gleeful mother to sign. I'll be moving out within this month. Don't worry, I'll submit these papers to the court immediately after the move. Fine. Goodbye. Black sheep, whatever they called me, my heart was unshaken. 2 weeks later, the day had finally come. The weather was perfect, with a pleasant breeze blowing. It was the perfect day to start a new life. I need this and that move too, yes, everything as I instructed, I told the movers as I bustled around what had become someone else's home. After all, I had to move everything that was purchased with my money or had a receipt in my name. Hey, you're taking the coffee table, the sofa, and even the TV. You're stripping the living room bare, you sneaky cat thief. They were both following me around, shouting. To be honest, they were just in the way. If you say this house under your name is yours, then all of this stuff paid for by me is mine, right? I finished my last set of instructions, let out a sigh, and turned around. The two of them fell silent at my words, looking at me bewildered. I glanced at them and turned on my heel. Well then, goodbye. That was the last time I saw both of them. I completed the move without any issues and immediately submitted the divorce papers. They were promptly accepted, and I was free. Not having to share mortgage payments or contribute to a joint account was a relief, and I was surprised at how much money I had left over. I never realized I was earning this much. Over the past year, paydays have been depressing. I was genuinely shocked when I realized my monthly payments. Later, I found out what happened to my ex-husband Dennis and my former mother-in-law after I left them. Because they lost me as the breadwinner, they started falling behind on all their bills. Demand letters started piling up at their home. Dennis, ever so proud, ignored all of it. He didn't consult with the bank or the IRS. Eventually, they were faced with demands for a lump sum payment. Unable to pay, Dennis borrowed money from a loan shark to cover it. But that wasn't the end of their problems. Realizing he couldn't avoid repaying loan sharks, Dennis finally swallowed his pride and started doing manual labor at a low-paying job. Had it not been for his period of unemployment, he could have found a more decent job, but that's none of my business now. As for my mother-in-law, her pension wasn't enough to live on, so she started working a part-time job. She's now a cashier and has a reputation as a lady who can do her job right. Not surprising for someone who was ungrateful, never worked, and just ordered food delivery all the time. But again, that's none of my business. As for me, I'm enjoying my single life. My skin has improved, and even I can tell that my expression has softened. People tell me I smile more now and that I've become more attractive. I hardly do any overtime work and can fully relax on weekends. I even have time to enjoy my hobbies. My life is just like it was before marriage, but because my married life was so miserable, everything now feels incredibly wonderful. I've also been getting along well with a popular guy at work. He had been interested in me for a while but hesitated to approach me because I was married. Anyway, life is smooth sailing this time around, that's for sure. I am feeling great today. Our electricity bill suddenly shot up. Panicked, I called the power company. A worker arrived and, looking puzzled, asked, "Did you see this wire before?" Bob and I hurried over as the worker moved a potted plant aside for a better view. There, from our outdoor outlet, stretched a strange wire leading to my in-laws' house. "Do you recognize this wire?" The worker's question made Bob and me exchange knowing glances. "Hey Bob, could this be?" "Yeah, no doubt. This explains our crazy electric bill." Bob unplugs the wire quickly. Suddenly, a loud scream comes from my in-laws' place. "What?" "It's probably my mother-in-law." Then there's frantic muttering. The voice grows louder, and suddenly, my mother-in-law jumps out from the bushes. I'm Mary Johnson, a 32-year-old stay-at-home mom. I love trying out limited-time desserts as a hobby. I enjoy gathering dessert info from friends or doing research. My husband Bob, who's the same age as me, has always supported my hobbies. We've known each other since college, and I've always admired his kindness. I also have a deep fondness for my in-laws who raised such a wonderful man. Many of my married friends complained about their mothers-in-law, but thankfully, that's not the case for us. My mother-in-law and I share a love for desserts, and she's always happy when I bring her treats. My father-in-law, though quiet, always has a reassuring smile. They've always been kind to me, and I feel the same about them. They live about a 30-minute drive away. Not too close, not too far away, just the perfect distance. But sometimes I wonder if maybe we could live together, the four of us. It's not that I'm eager for it. but I think we might get along better than expected. I admire them enough to entertain such thoughts. However, life doesn't always go as smoothly as we hope. One day, I was shocked by the news from Bob. Your parents? It turns out my in-laws were moving into the empty house next door. I always assumed they owned their place, but it seems they were renting. Their house had aged, prompting them to consider moving. When they discovered the vacant house next to ours, they seized the opportunity. It's a sudden, close move. Anxiety immediately washed over me. So far, I've had a good relationship with my in-laws, but I worry about how this will change things. Living next door means we could see each other every day if we wanted to. I do like my in-laws, but truthfully seeing them daily feels overwhelming. However, I can't just say that now. It's too late to back out. In fact, when we learned about the move, Bob gently suggested to his parents, maybe you shouldn't. But they brushed it off, insisting, we get along so well now. It'll be fine. I once thought we could even live together. I regret ever entertaining such optimistic thoughts. As my anxiety heightened, my in-laws moved in next door. We greeted them cautiously, and initially things seemed fine. We kept a respectful distance and set boundaries. But as they settled in, my mother-in-law began to overstep boundaries like never before. She started exhibiting all the don't do this behaviors you hear about. Dropping by unannounced became routine, and once inside, she acted like it was her own home. Not only that, it felt like they were monitoring our every move. Then, on the day my mother-in-law showed up uninvited and commented on our dinner, she said something unbelievable. Hey Mary, I've been thinking maybe you could stop locking the door. I was speechless. Can you imagine in this day and age? My mother-in-law suggesting we leave our door unlocked. Not locking it means anyone could walk in at any time, which is not only unsettling but clearly unsafe. Since my mother-in-law moved nearby, even the sound of the doorbell makes my heart race. Now there's a chance she could just stroll into our house without us even noticing. That's definitely not something I'm comfortable with. Given the current circumstances, I have to admit, the thought of leaving the door unlocked is unsettling. Trying to keep the mood light, I politely declined with a smile. However, she frowned and responded, Oh Mary, you're such a warrior. But don't worry, I'll ask our neighbors to keep an eye out for you. And remember, your father-in-law and I are nearby. We'll be dropping in often. I know her intentions are good, and I appreciate that. That's why I couldn't bring myself to tell her how overwhelming her frequent visits had become, but everyone has their limits. Last week, it felt like she was always at our doorstep. Having tea with my mother-in-law every day at our house naturally leads to some tensions. I've come to realize that maintaining a healthy relationship between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law is all about finding the right balance. She'd leave random potted plants in our yard or plant flowers without asking, as if she had free rein. If it happened once in a while, I could overlook it, but it became a daily occurrence. Since the door incident, she's brought it up multiple times. I managed to deflect her by citing my strong security concerns as a wife. However, once that was settled, my mother-in-law started asking for a spare key. I knew I had to get Bob to reject her request. Giving her such a powerful item now was simply not an option. Despite my disagreements with her behavior, I didn't exactly dislike her. She could be intrusive, but I understood it came from good intentions. Instead, I felt more guilty about turning her down than anything else. But over time, those feelings began to shift. Whether it was me, her, or both of us changing, I couldn't say. However, I started to feel uneasy and annoyed by her remarks. It was a few months after she moved in. By then, it had become routine for her to visit after lunch. I once inquired about my father-in-law, and it seems he typically goes for walks or shopping alone. I suggested she join him, but she declined, saying, "Walking tires me out." Lately, she's become a typical mother-in-law. Before, when I made her tea, she'd just say thank you. But now there's always a comment like, "It's lukewarm," or "It's weak." Every time she speaks, it's either gossip or speaking ill of someone. Being around her brings me down. But I can't exactly push her away, so I just nod and force a smile. It's not a great situation, right? The grass keeps growing, and they never cut it. I've even thought about mowing it myself. Today, my mother-in-law was passionately discussing a neighbor's consistently neglected yard, so I was like, oh, when she suddenly stopped talking, I instinctively followed her gaze to the bookshelf. Did she find a book she liked? It'd be peaceful if we can just read together. Did you find a book you're interested in? As I was about to approach the bookshelf, she reached past it, grabbing something from the rack next to it. Susan, you shouldn't touch that. Upon seeing what she took, I quickly reached out, but she innocently opened it, then exclaimed with delight, "Oh my Mary dear, oh dear, didn't you overspend last month? Goodness, your electricity bill is twice as much as ours." What? My mother-in-law was looking at, as if she were reading a weekly magazine, was our household account book. Stop, give it back. When I quickly took it away, my mother-in-law chuckled softly. You really don't have to be so flustered. But Mary, it seems like you're not so good at saving money. Bob must feel bad having a wife who struggles with budgeting. You should try a bit harder, okay? My face burned with embarrassment as my mother-in-law boldly opened the household account book, clearly labeled on both the front and back covers. I was incredulous. Regarding the desserts, I have a soft spot for limited edition treats too, so I understand the temptation. But if you can't save a dime, do you truly deserve to indulge in sweets? Adding to the frustration, my mother-in-law kept on nagging, criticizing our spending on food and a skyrocketing electricity bill. She even boasted about her own frugality. After her tirade, she seemed content and left. Once she was gone, I was overwhelmed with emotion and couldn't stop crying. The built-up stress likely played a role as well. I had reached my breaking point. I cried uncontrollably until Bob returned home. You don't have to take Mom's criticisms to heart, he reassured me, though I found it easier said than done. I'm really sorry. I'll talk to Mom and ask her not to visit as often, he added, comforting me. After I had calmed down a bit, I decided to address another concern that had been weighing on me, the soaring electricity bill. As pointed out by my mother-in-law, it had inexplicably spiked over the past few months. I was worried about it, but dealing with my mother-in-law had consumed all my attention. Bob examined the details of the electricity bill, puzzled. This is definitely unusual. I know, right? The next bill is due soon, isn't it? If it seems off again, we should contact the electric company, I suggested. A few days later, a bill arrived, shocking us with a whopping $1,300 increase, more than double our usual amount. Sensing something was wrong, we quickly arranged for a technician from the electric company to visit. The technician conducted a thorough inspection and then directed our attention to something peculiar. Were you aware of this wire? As Bob and I approached, the technician gently moved a potted plant, revealing an external outlet hidden beneath its long leaves. We had forgotten about it since we never used it after building the house. From that outlet, the technician pointed out, a wire extends, leading towards my in-laws' house. Do you know anything about this wire? At the technician's question, Bob and I exchanged knowing glances. We both had a suspicion. Hey Bob, could this be? Yeah, without a doubt. This explains our sky-high electric bill. To confirm, we followed the wire with the technician, navigating through bushes and tall weeds. True enough, the wire led to my in-laws' storage shed. We couldn't see where it connected from our vantage point, but it was evident that it had something to do with their house. The technician, with a serious expression, asked, "Should I call the police?" No, we might have to, but let's talk to them first. This house belongs to our parents after all, I explained. The worker initially seemed tense, perhaps suspecting theft of electricity, but upon realizing it was a family home, his expression softened with relief. Oh, I see. I'll be on my way then. Yes, thank you for taking the time to come out here. We really appreciate it, I replied gratefully. We escorted him to his vehicle and watched him drive off. After he left, Bob and I turned to each other, lost in thought. Bob let out a heavy sigh, resting his head in his hands. I'm sorry for having a mother like that, he said with a hint of frustration. It's hard to say. Don't worry about it. What should we do next? If it's like any other day, Bob's parents are probably home right now. Should we confront them directly, or should we come up with a plan first? Bob, his hand covering his mouth, began to walk towards the external outlet. Thanks to the employee who had moved the potted plant earlier, the outlet was now clearly visible. Come to think of it, maybe his mother intentionally placed the potted plant here to conceal this outlet. Though I hate to suspect, I can't think of any other reason. I wonder what this is connected to, I mused. Suddenly, Bob reached out and swiftly unplugged the wire. Wait, is it okay to unplug that? I asked, a bit concerned. I just did. The thought of them calmly stealing our electricity all this time makes me furious, Bob replied indignantly. Anyway, we have the employee as a witness. I won't let them make any excuses. If necessary, we have that as well, he added firmly. That's true, I nodded in agreement, feeling determined. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed from Bob's parents' house. Likely my mother-in-law's. Moments later, we heard frantic muttering and the voices started approaching us. Then, with great force, my mother-in-law burst out from behind the hedge, clearly not expecting to find us there. Upon seeing us, she let out a surprised gasp. "What are you two doing here?" she snapped. I stood tall and replied, "Susan, do you have business in our yard? You seem quite flustered." She looked away, visibly uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Bob held onto the removed wire firmly. When my mother-in-law exclaimed, "Oh," and tried to snatch it from Bob, he deftly hid it behind his back. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "No, that's what I should be asking you," Bob retorted, thrusting a wire in front of her face. "This was plugged into our outlet," he emphasized the word "our." My mother-in-law's eyes darted around, and then she defensively looked upwards. "So what? Do you know where this wire goes?" "I have no idea," she admitted. "Just plug it back in now. Things are a mess here since you pulled it out." I couldn't believe her audacity. She was essentially admitting to causing the issue without any remorse. But my mother-in-law seemed more panicked than guilty. I understood why she was so flustered. Smiling reassuringly, I spoke up. "Susan, please calm down. Let's discuss this calmly. How can we plug in a wire when we don't know where it leads? This is our outlet, right? It's not so simple to just plug it in, especially when we don't understand its purpose," I insisted. My mother-in-law squirmed uncomfortably. "Oh, Susan, remember what you said to me? You lectured me about not wasting electricity and criticized Bob for having a wife who couldn't save on energy." "Well now," she trailed off, clearly flustered. "I won't make it in time," I heard her mutter under her breath. "What time is it now?" "It's 9:57. "Oh no, I'm going to be late." With that, my mother-in-law hastily left, stumbling as she went. Bob looked perplexed by his mother's odd behavior, and I quietly explained the reason to him. "Huh, is that what you meant?" he mused. "So if we stick around, she'll show up again." "Exactly," I confirmed. Bob tossed the wire aside, and we returned inside the house. Shortly after, I heard a rattling sound at the front door, followed by the doorbell ringing. "It's my mother-in-law," I announced as I unlocked the door and opened it. "Hello, Susan," she greeted, pushing past me and entering the house. She seemed visibly upset, her footsteps echoing heavily as she made her way to the living room and plopped down onto the sofa. Bob, who was already there, looked puzzled, but before he could speak, my mother-in-law interjected. "Oh, I'm thirsty. Is the tea not ready yet?" "You're so slow. It's common courtesy to act before being told, you know," she complained. "And another thing, why do you always lock the door? Everyone in the neighborhood thinks I have a standoffish daughter-in-law. There's nothing valuable in this house anyway. It's just pretentious and annoying," she continued to grumble. "Oh, it's hopeless." "I had enough," I declared, grabbing the half-empty plastic bottle nearby and slamming it down on the table in front of my stunned mother-in-law. She sat there, eyes wide with shock. "Here you go, Mary, your water. You said there's nothing worth stealing in this house. But unfortunately, there were deceitful and sneaky people out there, like those who steal electricity." I could see the panic in her eyes as I sat beside her. Despite being so close, she couldn't bring herself to meet my gaze, her face drained of color. "Mary, what's wrong?" "You seem different," I remarked. "Really, Susan? Even I have my limits. Did you think I was some sort of deity?" I tried to lighten the mood with humor, but she seemed as terrified as if she'd encountered a demon. Turning to Bob for help, she found him shaking his head. With her daughter-in-law transformed into something akin to a demon beside her, and Bob unwilling to aid her, my mother-in-law's next move was unsurprising. "I apologize. I just remembered an errand I need to attend to," she stammered, attempting to leave. "You're not going anywhere," I asserted, pushing her shoulder as she rose from the couch, causing her to sink back into the cushions. "Mary, I really must," she began, but I interrupted. "You were the one who claimed to be thirsty, weren't you? You made a fuss, and now you're saying you can't drink water. Quite hypocritical, don't you think?" Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for her bottle. But this time, Bob intervened. My mother-in-law seemed momentarily relieved, but she was still adamant about not letting me drink the remaining water. Now the real problem begins, I continued sternly. When did you start stealing our electricity? You often accuse me of theft, which is a terrible accusation. But the wire plugged into my outlet actually originates from your house, doesn't it? My mother-in-law struggled to come up with a plausible excuse, opening and closing her mouth several times as she pondered how to extricate herself from the situation. To be honest, she's backed into a corner. Is she clueless? All she has to do now is up to it and say sorry. I mused, but it seemed fate had thrown my mother-in-law a lifeline. The doorbell rang, and upon answering, I found my father-in-law standing there. Is Susan around? Apparently, he had stepped out for a quick shopping trip. Returning home, he found the front door unlocked and the TV still on. But his wife was nowhere to be found. Understandably, he was concerned. Spotting her chance, my mother-in-law rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. My father-in-law looked rather embarrassed by his wife's distressed state. Sensing the need to clarify everything, Bob stepped in and recounted the situation from the beginning. After pondering for a moment, my father-in-law began to speak slowly. Isn't there some misunderstanding? Naturally, he found it hard to believe that his own wife had been secretly tapping into their son's electricity supply. Then who did the wiring? Do you think a stranger would go through the trouble of connecting someone else's wiring to another house? My father-in-law pondered, crossing his arms in thought. Eventually, he nodded and suggested, "Let's go take a look first," rising from his seat. However, my mother-in-law, clearly flustered, attempted to intervene. Ignoring her protests, my father-in-law asked Bob to guide him and headed towards the power outlet. The wiring disappeared into a storage shed, out of sight from where they stood. After my father-in-law investigated and returned, his face drained of color. "I'm deeply sorry. Please apologize to them," he urged, while my mother-in-law muttered her apology like a child. He explained that the wires led to a battery connected to my mother-in-law's computer via an extension cord. She had purchased the battery when she moved to a new house, intending to use it for emergencies. However, a salesman had advised her that storing electricity during cheaper nighttime hours and using it during the day was cost-effective. So she began using our house's electrical outlet to store electricity at night and power her home during the day. Initially, she only used it for that purpose, but as her extension cord had an extra socket, she started plugging in her computer and other appliances. Eventually, she was drawing electricity from our house all day long. When confronted, she defended herself, claiming she thought it was more economical. I was not only upset about her unauthorized use of our electricity, but also enraged by her hypocrisy. "You often criticized Bob for having a wife who can't save money and mocked my spending habits on sweets, didn't you?" I reminded her. Her lack of remorse was glaring. Saving money on your electricity bill by using someone else's electricity isn't saving money. It's theft, I admonished. And I won't overlook this just because we're family. If you don't sincerely apologize, we'll have no choice but to involve the police. My mother-in-law looked taken aback. Did she honestly believe she could get away with it? "What kind of wife are you? Are you willing to betray your own family?" I retorted sharply. "Let's not distort things. We're a family, and we just want to ensure everything is fair," I countered. As I reached for my phone, she panicked and lunged towards me, but Bob intercepted her. "You have no evidence," she protested desperately. "With all this evidence, do we need more? If so, we can provide something even more conclusive," I declared, gesturing towards the roof. My mother-in-law strained to see, and her face drained of color. Yes, our house had security cameras installed, and by chance, the area around the outlet fell within their range. My mother-in-law let out a soft gasp of distress. "Is this proof enough?" I questioned. "Oh, and one more thing. Is there something else?" I added. "You were in a hurry today because of the limited edition dessert release, weren't you?" I teased, flashing a sly smile. "Indeed. I had a friend purchase it for me, so I managed to secure it safely. If you hadn't been so fixated on siphoning electricity, you might have been able to order it online." "What a pity," I remarked. My mother-in-law collapsed to the ground, trembling and defeated. After discussing it with Bob, we decided against involving the police. While she had confessed and we had evidence, it seemed more trouble than it was worth. Plus, considering she was family, there was a chance it would be overlooked anyway. Instead, we agreed that my in-laws would cover the electricity they used and provide additional compensation for the inconvenience caused. Despite the inevitable awkwardness of living in close proximity, it was a necessary step for my peace of mind. As tensions rose, our interactions with my in-laws dwindled. Then we received unexpected news. They decided to move back to their previous house. Rumors about electricity theft, particularly involving my mother-in-law, had spread, deeply upsetting her. She tearfully expressed her desire to return to their old home. Surprisingly, I discovered that my mother-in-law didn't have the strong relationships with her neighbors that I had assumed. Instead, she was treated delicately, like a fragile object. After covering the compensation and moving costs, my in-laws found themselves financially strained. However, we made it clear that we wouldn't be offering any financial assistance. It's up to them to adjust their spending habits and manage on their own. With my mother-in-law gone, I've been enjoying life to the fullest each day. Our electric bill has significantly decreased, and now I'm contemplating which dessert to indulge in next. A wife works like a maid for her husband. If she doesn't listen to him, they might get divorced. I'm really mad, I told someone. My husband Tom took my special credit card and spent lots of money without asking me. He knew I was busy with work. They're on a vacation overseas. I feel really disrespected. I didn't answer Tom's phone call. Instead, I started planning how to get back at him. I'm Holly Smith. I used to be a famous actress in the USA. People all over the world love me, and I even made it big in Hollywood. I was famous for many years. But then I got married to Tom, who used to be my manager and helper. He took care of everything for me, from my health to my personal life. He's still helping me with my fashion stores now. I quit acting 10 years ago when I was 21. When I decided to stop acting while I was still really famous, it caused a big stir in the media. Fans were coming to my house, and I was getting tons of letters begging me to keep going. Despite all the gossip and rumors, Tom and I got married happily, and everyone was supportive. Just before I quit acting, I started my own fashion brand. Now, Tom works for me in finance, and I focus on running the business, making sure our models do well. Everything seemed great, but lately Tom's been acting strange. He looks tired and defeated all the time at home. Tom, what's going on? You don't seem yourself. Is something wrong at work? I knew he didn't like talking about his problems, so I always checked in on him. It could be tiring, but he always helped me with my problems too, so I didn't mind. Even though I often felt annoyed, I always valued Tom's efforts. You know, I'm tired of always being in the background, doing what you want, he suddenly said, surprising me. What's going on? You've never said anything like this before. I responded. Tom would sometimes vent his frustrations at me, but it was because he was stressed from work. He acted tough at his job, so maybe he had nowhere else to let off steam. I remembered how I used to snap at him when I was an actress, so I could empathize with how he felt. Still, his words caught me off guard, and I felt my voice trembling as I replied. I've been holding back. You're always busy, and I'm just here supporting you. Even though Tom earned more than most people, he was still just an employee in our company. I made more money, but I never thought it mattered who earned more in a marriage. His words surprised me. Even when you're home, you're always focused on work and hardly pay attention to me. When we go shopping, you just buy whatever you want. How do you think that makes me feel? Tom looked dissatisfied, his lips pressed together like a frustrated child. Honestly, his words irritated me. Most of our household expenses came from my income. His salary was his to spend as he pleased. As I reminded him, it was my way of thanking him for all his support and hard work. There were times when Tom supported me financially, especially when we didn't have much money. I wanted to thank him for all the times he put his own needs aside for me, even until I retired. It hurt to hear him sound ungrateful. The things I buy come from the savings I manage. If anything, I'm the one making sacrifices, I thought angrily. Holly, you have too much free time. I want more time off and to travel leisurely. The salary's good since I joined your company, but I never have time, he complained. When I left acting and started my own business, Tom said he'd keep managing actors. But when my business did well, he wanted to work with me. If I work with you, Holly, you won't be lonely. I want to be there for you, he said. I wanted to spend time with him, so I let him join. I never asked him to, so why was he acting like this? Wasn't our life good enough for him? Wasn't he being too selfish? As I thought this, Tom asked for time off to celebrate his parents' 60th anniversary. Can I have 2 weeks off to take them on a trip to Japan? He asked. They've never been, and I want to show them the tasty food and beautiful sights, he said. I braced myself for his response, but his request surprised me, leaving me feeling uneasy. 2 weeks off seemed like a simple request. He could easily make it work without causing any trouble. Our company was fair, and taking time off wasn't usually a problem. Yet here he was, making a big deal about it and negotiating directly with me. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint what. I tried to push aside my irritation and replied calmly, I'm fine with that, but it won't work this year. I have important events lined up, like a fashion show, and preparing for the Paris collection. Maybe we can plan it for next year when my schedule is more flexible. I want to be there for my in-laws' celebration, but work is really busy this year. I suggested a different date, but Tom refused with a smile. It's okay, we'll celebrate with my family. I just want some quality family time, he said. His words stung, suggesting that I was a burden. So, what do you think? Don't I deserve some time off too? Tom often spoke without thinking, and while it was one of his flaws, I accepted him as my partner, flaws and all. But I couldn't ignore how his words hurt me, even if he didn't mean it. Why does he talk to me like this? Doesn't he care about me? As I pondered, Tom interrupted, Hey Holly, are you listening to me? I owe a lot to Tom's parents. Even though I couldn't visit them often because of work, Tom's parents always treated me like their own daughter and praised my work. We're so lucky to have such a wonderful daughter, his mother said when I married into the family, and his father celebrated our marriage with joy. It was their 60th anniversary celebration, and I understood their desire to celebrate it this year. But how could I agree happily after being spoken to like that? It doesn't matter to me, take 1 week or 2, do as you like. I couldn't hide my anger and let it show. This seemed to upset Tom. He got up, visibly upset, and left the room without a word. We had been sleeping in separate bedrooms due to work, and from that day until his trip, we didn't see each other at all. Is that really true? Isn't your husband being too harsh? My secretary, noticing my unusual behavior the day Tom left for his trip, pressed me for details. She's an exceptional talent and has been supporting me since I started managing the company. As women, we often see eye to eye, and sometimes she's even more reliable than my husband. She's quick-witted yet caring, always there to support me when I'm down or about to make a mistake. I cherish her like family. She admires me like a real sister, and I often confide in her. Her honest and mature advice, beyond her years, is always valuable. And this time too, she noticed something was off about me and kindly showed concern. I hesitated at first about opening up, but realized keeping it in could affect my work. I decided to tell her everything that happened up to today. She furrowed her brow in anger. If I were you, I'd have given him a piece of my mind. You've been too soft on your husband, boss. I get that you love him, but you can't let him walk all over you. Her blunt advice, making me wonder who's older, hit me hard. In an environment where everyone tends to hold back from telling me things, she's the only one who treats me as an equal. I really appreciate her directness and the ease we have in our conversations. Being in a higher position often requires humility and restraint, so having someone who can speak honestly with me like she does is incredibly valuable. You're right. What should I do? I asked. Can't you call him? Why not talk after work today? Don't worry about ruining his trip. If things keep going like this, you might end up getting divorced. She urged me, sounding like an older sister, leaving me with no choice but to agree. As she suggested, I plan to call him right after work. He's in Japan, so there's a significant time difference of about 15 hours from the US. For example, if it's 5:00 p.m. here, it's 8:00 a.m. there, which should be around breakfast time. I had sent him an email earlier to let him know I needed to talk, so he should be expecting my call. I tried calling, hoping he would answer, but there was no response. Maybe he's still busy with everyone. I'll try again later. Despite calling every 30 minutes, there was still no answer. Worried, I decided to contact my mother-in-law to check on him. Hello, Holly, you must be tired. I'm sorry we went on this trip without you. We wanted you to come, but Tom insisted otherwise, she said. I knew Tom's mother used to be strict, but now she's much more caring and always worries about my busy schedule. It's okay, we're swamped at the company this year, so I couldn't make it. I'll make it up to you next year, alright? I assured her. "Oh, don't worry about it. Just having this wonderful trip as a gift from you is more than enough for us." Her kind words surprised me. "Wait, a gift?" I asked, confused. She seemed surprised by my question, and then explained that Tom told them the trip was paid for by me since I couldn't join. I was shocked to hear this news. "What?" I exclaimed over the phone. My mother-in-law realized I didn't know anything about it from my reaction and quickly clarified. "Isn't this the trip wholly arranged? Tom paid for everything with Holly's card, so I thought it was from you." The trip included Tom's parents and his sister's family, 5 people in total. The flight alone cost about $1,000 per person minimum, not to mention other expenses, easily exceeding $10,000. It was outrageous to spend such a large amount without consulting me, especially since I usually cover living expenses. Tom doesn't gamble or smoke, so his salary should be intact. He definitely earns enough to afford such expenses, yet he didn't. With him not answering my calls, my anger started to boil. My mother-in-law noticed my distress and spoke with concern. "Holly, are you all right? We'll reimburse every cent." Tom insisted on covering everything, which seemed strange to us. "My husband and I decided we'll repay you later. We miss you and plan to visit soon. This trip might have been a mistake." With these words, my mother-in-law tried to reassure me. "You're not to blame. It's also your 6th-day celebration, so please use that money for your enjoyment. I'll make sure Tom pays you back, but could you tell me more about how the trip was planned? I'm curious about what Tom was thinking." It dawned on me that this trip must have been meticulously planned months ago, and Tom was using me without my knowledge. In that moment, suspicions about him started to creep in. Then my mother-in-law shared a shocking revelation. The trip was actually suggested by Tom's sister and her husband. To my surprise, it was Tom's sister and her husband, who had always criticized me, who initiated the trip. Tom's brother-in-law, an executive at my rival company, he looked down on me for being a female CEO because of his pride. Tom never stood up to his sister. The sight of Tom being so attentive to someone other than himself, especially M, must have caught my sister-in-law's attention, even though she's always had Tom under her thumb. I couldn't stand the fact that she could be offended by just a slightly friendly gesture from Tom. With their strong rivalry, my sister-in-law and her husband disliked me, and I tried my best to avoid dealing with them as much as possible. The couple, always competitive and disliking me, planned this trip, possibly convincing Tom to pick a fight and exclude me. They waited for the right moment to bring Tom along as a source of money. "I'm sorry, I didn't know anything. Tom told me you were busy and asked us not to contact you directly. If my unsuspecting in-laws and I were to communicate, it would reveal the plan, potentially causing problems in our marriage." To prevent this, Tom had to restrict his parents' actions in advance. For my in-laws, who didn't understand how busy I was, Tom's advice was final. They decided to follow his instructions and express their gratitude when they returned. "Holly, did you give Tom a card or something?" "He was paying with a black card I've never seen before," my father-in-law asked, sounding hurried as if he had been eavesdropping. He brought up something that had been on my mind the moment he mentioned a black card. I checked my safe. The black card he referred to was the company's crucial black card, accessible only by Tom and me, who knew the safe's password. I never imagined Tom would stoop to embezzlement, but the card that should have been there was missing. With Tom overseeing finance, it was easy for him to manipulate records and misuse company funds. When I realized this, my anger reached its peak, and I shared the story with my in-laws. They must have been shocked. My mother-in-law turned pale and panicked, saying, "What should we do? Are we involved in this embezzlement? We'll return with Tom immediately. We're just as guilty as he is, even if unknowingly. We'll face the consequences once we're back," my father-in-law, a man of strong responsibility, said. I shook my head, rejecting his words. This was all orchestrated by Tom's sister's family and Tom himself. My in-laws are not to blame. They were just manipulated by Tom. They're not at fault, but I can't let them off the hook. We don't need punishment, but could you help me with something? I've turned a blind eye to Tom's actions until now, and that's my fault. He's taking advantage of me, thinking he can get away with just an apology. This isn't just a marital issue, it's a company issue. We need to teach him a lesson. All right, we'll do whatever we can to help. So we began plotting a revenge plan. I was surprised by my own cunning, but my love for Tom had died. Now only hatred and anger surged through me. Initially, my in-laws were hesitant about this drastic plan, but they also felt responsible for Tom as his parents, and eventually they resolved to support me. As parents, they agreed to be my allies. Amidst this discussion, Tom unexpectedly called. I ended the call with my in-laws and answered Tom's. "What's up? We're enjoying a family-only trip. So what's this important talk about?" Tom's sarcastic tone only fueled my irritation. "You took your time calling. Did you go a little wild, huh?" "No way. Just having drinks at a nearby bar with mom and dad." This confirmed he was lying. I had just spoken to his parents, and there was no noise of a bar in the background. Besides, they had no reason to lie to me. His words erased all the time and trust we had built, and my feelings for him cooled entirely. "Oh, really? By the way, Tom, you haven't been tampering with the company's expenses, have you?" His demeanor instantly changed at my unexpected question. "What's that all about?" His usually light-hearted tone turned dead serious. Was this his true nature? Seeing his attitude shift as if he now saw me as an enemy, I faced him with equal firmness. "Just checking, since there will be an audit at the company soon. Are you suspecting me?" His defensive reaction betrayed his guilt. I couldn't help but chuckle at his feeble response. "What's the matter? I was just asking. And now you're talking about suspicion. Have you done something wrong?" "No, anyway, the house better not be a mess when I get back, okay?" Realizing he was only making himself look more suspicious, he quickly changed the subject. His actions only served to raise more suspicion. I almost found his foolishness impressive. Who knows? I've been busy with work too. Cut me some slack. I hate returning to a dirty house full of bugs. They say a wife is her husband's maid. Disobey and it's divorce. Even our executive says that to his wife. Looks like I might have to do the same, huh? You wouldn't want that, so keep the house clean. I had never seen him get along with the executive. His current words were likely his own thoughts, but aware of his weaker position, he used the third person to express them. His pitiful attempt made me sigh. Sure, I'll keep that in mind. There was no need for further conversation. Tom clearly looked down on me, even resorting to embezzling company funds. Embezzlement is a serious crime, and I could report him to the police. No mercy, even for a spouse. But that alone wouldn't satisfy me. After ending the call with Tom, I immediately made a certain phone call. The next day, while busy preparing for the fashion show, I was bombarded with calls. Of course, it was Tom. I noticed his calls late at night while I was out for a reason, accompanied by my secretary. Luckily, she was driving, so I answered Tom's call. "You're late. What have you been doing?" His voice was more agitated than I'd ever heard, surprising both my secretary and me, who were listening on speaker. "What do you mean?" "I was working." "Did you do something yesterday?" "Do something like what?" "Don't play dumb. Tell me the truth. What did you do?" Tom was in complete panic, and in the background, I could hear several Japanese men confronting him, along with my sister-in-law and her husband. "Sounds noisy. Is everything okay?" "No, it's just..." Tom, who had been blustering, suddenly began to stammer. He realized that admitting anything would put him in a very disadvantageous position. His odd behavior prompted me to reveal what I had done the day before, as it was time to make him taste despair. "Too bad, Tom. You were supposed to be having a blast in Japan. But it seems your dream turned into a nightmare overnight. Huh? But it's what you deserve for misusing someone else's money. You did something, didn't you?" As he reacted strangely, I disclosed my actions from the previous day. I reached out to the president of the credit card company I had a long-standing relationship with, even though it was after hours. He agreed to assist me immediately. He promptly suspended the company's credit card. When a credit card is misused, the company isn't obligated to pay the store, leaving the store at a loss. However, since Tom had arranged to pay the entire bill at checkout, with the card blocked, he couldn't settle the payment and was now facing interrogation by the hotel receptionists. Tom, Mom, and Dad have already checked out. The taxi I arranged for them has left with them. So there's no one coming to pick you up. My sister-in-law, feeling trapped, bombarded Tom, asking what to do next. Hearing this, Tom panicked even more and directed his anger at me. "How could you do this and think it's okay? Are you ready for a divorce?" "Fine. I'd rather not be married to someone who embezzles company funds. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and we're proceeding with divorce proceedings." "What?" Tom was visibly shaken by my calm demeanor. I've overlooked so much of your behavior, Tom. There was a time when you supported my work, and I appreciated that. But I've reached my limit. My patience has run out. That can't be. Realizing he was in a dire situation, Tom finally understood my anger and let out a pitiful cry. The receptionist relentlessly demanded payment from Tom and his group, who were now cornered in despair. But none of them could speak Japanese, relying on a guide for communication. Listening to their plight, I suggested switching the call to me. No one there speaks Japanese, right? Let me talk to them for you. You're going to help? Of course. Tom must have thought I had a change of heart. Realizing his mistake, without hesitation, he handed his phone to them. I explained the situation to the receptionist in Japanese, and they quickly understood, seeming quite cooperative. To alleviate their concerns, I also provided them with my contact information, which my secretary noted down. They happily agreed to my proposal. After a brief conversation, they returned the phone to Tom. What happened? Did you sort it out? Yes, I've taken care of it. Now it's up to you guys. Really? You're a lifesaver, Holly. I love you. He then hurried off, apparently called by the receptionists. Clueless, Tom ended the call and followed them. Are you sure about this? It probably won't end well. Exactly. It's perfect for them to experience some hardship. An hour later, as expected, I received a barrage of calls from Tom again. When I answered, Tom's voice was filled with pitiful anguish. Holly, what's happening here? Where are we? Explain yourself and come help us right now. Crying out, he showed me via video call the image of a slum area in Osaka, Japan. The sight was shocking. Tom and his sister's family were stripped of their belongings and in a pitiful state. Caught by those individuals, being taken to what's considered the most dangerous place in Japan was honestly unexpected. When I spoke to the receptionist, he mentioned, I'm a big fan of yours. I'll arrange a harsh punishment, just leave it to me. But I never anticipated it would be this severe. I couldn't help but laugh at the unexpected turn of events. You're lucky to be alive in Japan's most dangerous place. It's quite a miracle. What? Wait, Holly, what's going on? Explain yourself and come help us right now. Since it's a video call, they could probably hear everything clearly. Surrounding Tom and his group were homeless individuals, causing a stir. You folks caused trouble for Holly. Now face the consequences. Time to reflect. My in-laws chimed in, surprising everyone. What's going on? A friend of Holly flew us back on a private jet. We're back in the US and Holly picked us up. We realized you were trying to set Holly up. We told her to do whatever she wants with you guys. As they spoke, the onlookers behind them began confronting Tom's sister and her husband. The homeless folks were ruthless. If you had anything valuable, even women weren't spared. They were shouting while on the video call. In such a dangerous place, it's no wonder they became prime targets. I addressed the crowd in Japanese, telling them loudly that these men had used my card illegally and mistreated me. Every night, I urged them to do whatever they pleased with them. The locals, eager to join in, gladly agreed to make things difficult for them. Suddenly, the call ended, perhaps because someone grabbed the phone. Tom and his group were left in the dangerous neighborhood, terrorized daily and treated like slaves by the locals. Without money to return to the US, they were essentially stuck abroad. I confirmed the subsequent events with the hotel reception. Apparently, an acquaintance of the receptionist was a boss in the area and agreed to take care of Tom and his group in exchange for me treating him to some good liquor next time, assuring me not to worry. The deal was made under the condition that they would be protected from life-threatening situations. In return, I agreed to sing at the hotel, something I hadn't done in a long time. Your live performance video was the only one you ever released when you were active. It's still my treasure. As a token of thanks, come stay at our hotel and sing for us. I'll make sure you're treated like a VIP. With the help of the men from the hotel, I successfully got revenge on Tom and his group. I also managed to divorce Tom. I felt rejuvenated and have been enjoying life with my in-laws. Tom's sister and her husband were fired for unexcused absences from work. Their phones were taken by the locals, leaving them without a means to contact anyone. My in-laws explained the situation well, so it didn't become a police matter, and no one seemed to care about them. Thus, my ties with Tom were completely severed. Since then, I've been focusing on work and living a happy life. Occasionally, I check on Tom and his group through the receptionist. They're still enduring harsh conditions, but I don't feel any sympathy for them. I asked for their lives to be spared, and now I'm relishing my life to the fullest.